Hey, welcome to another great edition of Mississippi Stories. I'm your host, Marshall Ramsey, the editor-at-large at Mississippi Today, and you can always check out our great coverage at MississippiToday.org, or if you'd like to see a cartoon of mine, well, they're there as well. Really excited about our guest today because he's a guy, as an artist, not as editor-at-large or all the other stuff I do. As an artist, I greatly admire his work, and I admire the breadth of his work. And one of his pieces of art now, I guess you could say, is, of course, the documentary on Walter Anderson. I hope you've had a chance to see it. It was broadcast on Mississippi Public Broadcasting. It's Walter Anderson, The Extraordinary Life and Art of the Islander. And, of course, there is an accompanying book that he and Robert St. John have put together. Robert St. John, of course, produced it with Anthony Thaxton. And the book is fantastic as well. It really dives deep into the life of an incredible man who, on the surface, was misunderstood during his life. However, his body of work is something that is a treasure to both the state of Mississippi and I think to art in general. Anthony, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, thank you, Marshall, for having me.
Well, number one, I think everybody needs to understand that we are doing this early in the morning because you are in the middle of a book tour. So you and Robert are hightailing it all around the state right now. And I've done a book tour with Robert like that. And it is high energy, a lot of fun, and I gained 30 pounds because of all the great restaurants that Robert took us to.
Absolutely. I mean, traveling with Robert, and everybody comes up asking for food advice and this sort of thing, and Robert knows everything to eat everywhere. And we were at the in Greenwood at the Delta Meat Market, and we ordered a couple of sandwiches, and before he tasted his, we're like, he wanted to taste everything. He said, let's cut them in two, and I'll have half of yours and you have half. It sounds good. So he tastes his, and then he writes that it's one of the best top 5 sandwiches in Mississippi. I mean, he just loved it. It was a ham melt kind of thing. And I'm like, I'm very thankful that we cut the sandwich in two before we started because I wouldn't have gotten any of it had he tasted it first. So traveling with Robert does have its perks.
It does. And I think about, because we did our tour in 2005. So I did the Nobody's Poet book. I illustrated that with him. And I learned 3 things. Number one, I could forge Wyatt Waters' name really well because everybody was like, "Are you Wyatt Waters?" It's like, only in my dream am I Wyatt Waters. No,
exactly. Yeah, you and I are in a small club with Wyatt because Robert has done, I think, maybe 12 or 13 books. I mean, a ton of great books, and by far, Wyatt's the best. They look great. I mean, it's just people love them. I hope eventually they'll do more of those kind of things. But you and I have gotten to tag along, and when we were talking yesterday, setting this up, we were talking about how grueling it is, and you're not really expecting that. And I've seen them I filmed them. I did the television series Palette to Palette and filmed them everywhere they would go and all. But it's different sitting in the seat, actually lifting the book after book after book and talking with folks, which has been wonderful.
Yeah.
I mean, I've reconnected with former students, with new friends, with old friends, people we've traveled with. I mean, it's been great. But at the end of the day, you crawl up in the bed and you just die because it has been such a draining day in a good way.
Yeah, you put yourself out there. My cousin Dave Ramsey gave me some really good advice when I first started getting into the book business. He said, walk into a bookstore and look around. He said, bookstores don't sell books. You sell books. And you see that with Robert. Robert's really good at it because, everybody that comes up and signs a book with Robert, is his best friend for life. He just literally, he's just opening. But I enjoy the book part. I mean, because creating a book, creating a movie, doing all these things is doing cartoons is generally a fairly solitary
Absolutely.
And it's wonderful because it's a God moment. And we're going to touch on that a little bit because I think Walter Anderson really is proof that the process is where the magic is with art, not the finished product. But right. It is nice to get out. And I think the thing I enjoy about it, and I think you probably will agree with this when you're when you're through with it and you can reflect, is that you get to see all of Mississippi. And I think sometimes we get into this habit of driving from our office to our house. And when you do a book tour, it's like being a politician on a statewide campaign. You're appreciative of a 4-lane highway program. And, you get to you go from Starkville to Corinth to, the coast and so you get to see this amazing state that we live in.
Well, and Marshall, it's funny because Robert and I, we're laughing that we're buying more books than we're selling, because every bookstore we go to, in Greenwood, they had this beautiful 4-volume collection of Greenwood photos. I mean, this beautiful gift books about the size of our book, really nicely designed, very nicely designed. I bought the 4 volumes. I'm not from Greenwood. I don't know anybody from Martha Foos, but I'm like, why am I buying these? But they were beautiful. And I wanted to just pour over those photos. So we keep carrying as many books back to the truck to go to the next place as we do. But it's learning Mississippi. It's seeing things in a fresh way. And again, the people that are coming out, I love seeing people that I know, but you can tell someone walking up to the table, if they've seen the documentary, if they've experienced that, they have a look on their face. I have seen the film, and it's like this kindred spirit even before we get started, because over and over we're hearing how this experience has made me look at Walter Anderson in a new way, even Mississippi in a new way, even that whole experience. And I was really reflecting last night. We had a great event at Jackson Academy, and we had some original Walter Anderson paintings that the Mississippi Museum brought out. And Betsy Bradley did a panel discussion with Robert and John Anderson and me.
Yeah.
Had a great time. But I was really reflecting that this thing is a bigger scope than what I thought it was. It's not just Mississippi. I mean, Anderson showed in the Smithsonian, he is worldwide. People will fly into New Orleans, drive over to Ocean Springs and visit, and then go back to New Orleans and eventually wind up back in the Netherlands or whatever. He's got a reach now, not nearly as large as I think he deserves and should have, and hopefully will have, but all just meeting these folks, I'm realizing we're all part of something bigger. And like you before we leave well, we don't have to leave Robert, but
let's just throw Robert behind us.
That's right. Forget about Robert. Now, as we're talking about Robert, the book you guys did, he just wrote a column this week. And if you haven't read it, I hope you'll go read it. He wrote a column about, he was doing a tour, and he said early on, we were talking about this writing too, that he would go, not that he was cynical about book signings or something, but maybe taking them a little for granted early on.
Yeah.
And it's so grueling and everything. But he said he was about to leave, and a bookstore owner said, "Hey, just wait a minute. A lady's called from Brookhaven. She's driving in and wants to meet you." And Robert's like, "I'm so tired." He probably had 2 signings that day. All I want to do is go home.
Yeah.
But she shows up, and this was from a book following Nobody's Poet. But she comes in, she didn't buy the book there. She brings in Nobody's Poet, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, I've waited for this." And she comes in and she sits down and says, "I want to tell you a story." And he's like, "Oh my goodness, I just want to go to bed." But he's listening and giving, which I appreciate about Robert. Even when he's tired, he's still trying. But she shares how she had a friend with terminal cancer who, reading those columns, because it's a collection of columns, and you did great illustrations, cartoons going with those columns, and she would read those at his bedside, his deathbed, and laughing together in his final days and all, reading this. And Robert wound up talking to her, for 30 minutes, an hour after he was supposed to have gone. And he said that night really changed my view of this, and said, "Wait a minute, it's not about this book. It's not about my silly signature. It's not about, there are bigger things at play here." And sometimes we don't realize something we might view as something small or maybe insignificant, or you might think, well, my cartoons, I'm just doing cartoons, or I'm sitting here, I'm doing a film and it's on MPB. Does anybody care? These things do resonate, and Mississippi stories and the things Robert writes about, the things you draw about, the stories I want to tell on film, these are important things. It's who we are. And yesterday we saw James Meredith at Banner Hall and got to speak with him. And he was saying, a couple of years, even up to a couple of years ago, how some people were still angry that he had gone through Ole Miss, even all this. Like he said, I don't get that anymore. He said, since the turmoil out in the country and all, he said, it's different. He said, nobody seems upset anyway. And I'm like, well, Mississippi, we've got a lot of things. I think we've examined ourselves in the light of the current climate around the country and realized we're further down the road in a lot of ways than we thought we were. And a former student of mine, John Lassiter, was instrumental in helping getting the state flag changed. You know, we have come a long way, baby, in a lot of ways. And I'm so proud. You know, I look at our young people, and so many things are race or class or some of these things. They don't even think about that at all. This is just my friend. This is just my friend. And that really struck me yesterday. So I do think we're part of something here in Mississippi where people around the country can learn from these good folks that we are writing and drawing about.
You've got the talent to be anywhere. You really do. And, you know, and I was thinking about that as I was looking over all the things that you do and have done. And then I started thinking about, you know, my career. I mean, I've been in Mississippi in what is today? In about a week, I've been here 25 years. I moved here on December 16th, right?
In just a few more years, we'll claim you. No,
yeah, I'm still a newcomer. Trust me. You know, it's not how long you've been here. It's how long your great grandfather's been buried here. But,
exactly.
But I will say that. And one thing I learned with the Bush cartoons and all that stuff that went on, and I was talking to Jenna Bush Hager about that when I got to meet her. Mm-hmm. We all wake up every morning. We're all artists. Everybody, you know, I mean, we all wake up with a blank canvas, and whether we can draw stick figures or not, we have the ability to change somebody's life with whatever it is we produce in our life. And I was telling a group of doctors this yesterday. I said, like, you don't realize how many lives, and obviously you save lives, but you change lives at the same time. And I think about that. And the reason I bring that up is because I'm sitting here watching your documentary, which, by the way, you made me love Horn Island, which I know I would get eaten by mosquitoes and probably eaten by an alligator if I went there. But your shots of South Mississippi, of the coast, were so loving and so beautiful. And the way you treated Walter Anderson's artwork and the way you displayed that. But by the time I got done with that documentary, I totally had a different view of not only Walter Anderson, but of how I view my own artwork and the process on that. And so thank you. I just want to say thank you for what you did with the documentary, because I feel like you gave a man who deserved more credit than he gets a wonderful, you know, platform just for the world to see what this amazing man, how he managed to struggle through some serious storms in his own life. Also, too, you just absolutely changed me as an artist, and I just wanted to say thanks.
Marshall, that is very, very kind. And when we kind of were talking about that, and you saying all of that, that touches me. I mean, you know, more than anything that we have, because as artists, the first thing John Anderson was excited about was when we started talking about wanting to do this. And Robert has been a great collaborator, but John was excited that I'm an artist, and an artist telling his daddy's story, an artist telling an artist story. And he was excited about that. And we had lunch yesterday, and John Gibson from Mississippi Public Broadcasting, love John. He came and joined us for lunch. And as they were talking, they also, John said he was trying to put into words, and he was a big proponent, gave me sage advice on, hey, if you linger a little bit longer on the pot turning with the horse's sound effect, if you linger one more second, it's going to be even better. You know, he was just helping plus it, and was wonderful. Well, John, he said that he was talking with someone, and it dawned on him how he wanted to say it. He said, it's as if Walter Anderson had made that film. And what he meant, and what I know, I'm done. You know, but what he meant by that was that the way Anderson looked at nature and then transcribed that, and wasn't apart from nature, he was a part of nature, and how all that flowed together. And he was saying that how the interviews, and yes, I got to push the buttons and facilitate and see that happen, and it was wonderful. But the family stories and the things they told, Marshall, we didn't even have a narrator because we didn't need one. The family stories and the museum staff, who are family as well. Bill Dunlap, he's family as well. Robin Whitfield, who is the modern day Walter Anderson in touch with nature. She's wonderful. But watching their stories weave together, we said, we don't need an obtrusive narrator coming in and taking us out of that. And Robert said, I don't think we need that. And it just, so I think some of that kind of happened on its own, but the way my daughter helped me film a lot of the footage of going across the artwork, and instead of just full screen zooming in, putting it on the floor or crumbled up, and we had
it on the beach. Good God.
Exactly. How wonderful.
I was like, no.
And Maddie from the museum, who's the curator, she saw a 5-minute clip early on. She said, when did you get those? And I'm like, when did I get what, Maddie? And she said, the paintings. I don't remember you coming and getting those. And I'm like, Maddie, those were prints. I'm not going to take original paintings and put them in the wet sand or burn them, and that's, that kind of thing. But that's how Walter, I think if you walked in the cottage, they were all over the floor. There were some in the fireplace where he had tried to burn them and the edges were burnt. So we didn't want to have this pristine, clean. We wanted it cinematic, of course, and neat lighting and stuff. But we wanted that feel of, you walked in the cottage and you see the paintings lying around, the drawing on the floor, this one crumbled up, because like you were saying, and I appreciate your comment so much, and I value what you do so much. I always wanted to be a cartoonist, and I couldn't hack it. I'm not sharp enough, so I value that. But watching the process and wanting to do it in a way where people could really, even the shots, feel like you would be looking at them then. And my daughter, she got little objects. We would put seashells in the shots. We would put little things, because he would just toss those around and all. And something very personal, I mentioned my daughter, so she helped participate in the film, helped me film drone footage out on Horn Island, swatting mosquitoes off my legs as they're coming in. And well, we can talk about my son in a bit, but also my brother passed away this past year, my younger brother, and he was just a big proponent of mine. And the first drone footage we shared, I sent him a shot of, and he immediately posted on Facebook, and I'm like, Bobby, don't put that on Facebook, and he's like, oh, I was just so excited, and he was always wanting to share. And as he passed away in the middle of this, because the coast, we grew up on the coast and in the Lakeshore, Waveland, Bay St. Louis area, and I worked on shrimp boats. So the coast, it is a love letter to the coast. But at my brother's funeral, I got one of the yellow roses from one of the flower bouquets. So in some of the shots, as you pan across the images, my daughter put that rose in there, and it's kind of so when you see it's in 2 or 3 shots, the yellow rose lying there on the edge of the painting or something, a way to connect my family with it. And so I'm talking real fast so I don't get overclimped. But it's been personal. My son did the music. My wife helped assistant produce and help line up and schedule things, and was wonderful first viewer who would give me feedback. And so not only was it a family story for the Andersons and wonderful to meet them, and to kind of, John said that I was like one of their cousins growing up, but that I just fit right in. And we're in the middle of family disagreements and things. He said, you feel like a part of the family now, don't you? And I said, this is great. This is a family. But it was also personal with my family too. And with Robert and Jill giving feedback, watching, and it's just been a great, great association, and for all of us.
I've watched it 4 times now, and I'll probably watch it again. I mean, and it's, it's not that, it's right up there with Ted Lasso and multiple viewings for me. So
That's great. That's high praise.
Yeah, but I think that, the thing that I fell in love with, and understanding dynamics of family and childhood trauma, and, what it must have been like growing up with what went on with Walter Anderson and their mother. Their mother was a rock star and an incredible part of it. And I think really why the kids are as solid as they are, but just seeing the kids on film come to terms with their dad's legacy. And obviously, and I think the great metaphor was when they had the hammer and the mom and the sister broke the lock off the cottage, and they opened it up, and literally, I think that was the moment of understanding that this man who, obviously, I think the stress of his father dying, the stress of uh, the depression and having to make a living selling widgets, which he did not like the commercial aspect of art whatsoever, getting the malaria and getting ill. There was just he had a whole lot of demons that he had to face. And then I think the kids understood that artwork was honestly what brought their dad back to sanity. It was beautiful. I mean, it really was. I love all four of the kids, and I look forward to the day that I want to meet John. I mean, I just look forward to meeting him too. And I hate I didn't get a chance to go to the event and get to meet him, because what a neat guy.
He's a wonderful guy, and probably the biggest thing for me in this whole process is becoming friends with John.
Yeah.
And I've loved the experience with Robert and traveling and all of that.
Sure.
But John, when he offered to sail me out to Horn Island,
yeah,
okay, and we'd already formed a good relationship, because I would, hey John, I'm coming to Ocean Springs tomorrow. Can you get some paintings and meet me at your dad's cottage? So he would drop everything. I can't tell you how many trips we did that, and we would go to the cottage and film that artwork over and over and over. But as we're doing that, John is steadily talking. I'm steadily talking, and we just bonded so well. And he offered the Horn Island trip. So I'd grown up working on 40-foot shrimp boats. I mean, that's great. He was laughing yesterday. He said, I remember your face when you pulled up and you saw this like 14-foot sailboat sitting there, and your face as I'm climbing down into it. I'm like, I'd never been sailing. I'd always been on boats, but that's different. And so getting in this boat and him saying, all right, ease to the other side, and watching the concentration on his face and realizing, wait a minute, this is maybe more dangerous. It was in the middle of November. So, the winds and everything, the tide, the wind were coming from the north. So we were able to sail around the south side of the island and all. It was a wonderful experience. But on the way back, the wind died, and you can't just sit out there. You've got to get back before dark. Walter would sail at dark, but we weren't going to do, so we're having to paddle, and he's apologizing. I'm like, John, this is what your dad did, and nobody experiences this. Nobody gets to do this. And now I was sore for a month, but it was wonderful paddling. And I turn around and look at John, and there are two dolphins that keep jumping out of the water behind him. My camera was stored away in a waterproof thing as we were sailing back, because so I get my cell phone out, and that shot of the dolphin jumping out in the documentary in one of the Horn Island scenes, that's on my iPhone, shooting over John's shoulder, trying to keep steady, because they were just putting on a show. And John said, I think Daddy sent those dolphins to us. I mean, it was really cool. And I'm thinking, nobody. And the night before we left, it was a little windy, so we had to wait an extra day to go.
Yeah.
And I said, John, I need to go to the Travelodge or something. I don't have a place to stay. And he said, casually, he says, well, you could stay at Daddy's. And I'm like,
oh, wow.
I could stay at Daddy's. Okay, this is in November. So I froze my tail off, but I had a sleeping bag, and I spent the night in Walter's cottage. And I'm just going to tell you, Marshall, I think I did 6 watercolors that night and a couple more the next morning. That experience, and just I've been studying and reading and learning all of these things and hearing these Anderson quotes, and I'm sitting here, and they've rebuilt a room on the same size that the little room was. So I'm looking at that door, imagining him coming out of that door, because the little room's now at the museum. So I'm imagining him coming out of the door. I mean, I'm just painting. And then the rest of the cottage, there are other little paintings and things that he had done, little snippets behind Mary in the documentary. She was in the cottage. So you see a couple of little birds on the wall. But just being in that space, and Robert says a lot about Walter Anderson inhabiting a space.
Yeah.
And he did that, and Robin Whitfield talked about that, but he inhabited a space, I mean, maybe more fully and more deeply than maybe any artist ever. He was out there at one. My daughter was talking about reading Thoreau, and we were comparing Walden and him going to the woods to live deliberately, and comparing that with Walter Anderson. And my daughter said, well, basically Walden was more of an experiment, and then he went back to life. With Anderson, that was his life.
He was
and
there till he died. Yeah.
Yeah, he would come back, get supplies, but that was life. And somebody asked a question last night. A young lady asked, Chelsea asked a question at the Q&A to John about, do you regret the way your family treated your dad? Now that's a big question.
Yeah, that is. That's
and John's answer, he was wonderful, because he said, absolutely, I do. And part of the legacy of the Anderson story, so much myth and things. Oh yeah, my daddy knew Walter Anderson. He was crazy, and and that becomes the simple, easy thing. Yeah. George Orr, the Mad Potter of Biloxi. So the coast is known for kind of creating that mystique and that thing. Yeah. And yes, Walter had issue. Bill Dunlap said, I think he slipped over the edge a few times, but he got the work done.
Yeah. Bill's all about getting the work done.
Absolutely. If you're getting the work done, well, everything else is negotiable. And but I grew up thinking, well, what a shame. Walter just abandoned his family and went out there.
Yeah.
And yes, it's complex. It's not either or kind of thing. Yes, there is an element of, here's Mary and Billy, who have their dad as a caretaker as he's recovering at Old Fields. And then when he left Old Fields, after disagreements with the grandfather and everything, he went to live the rest of his life in the cottage, and the family lived next door to him. Yeah. So yeah, he would come back for birthdays or for a supper, but he was absent. But there are a lot of reasons for that absence. And so John related that, yes, I have regrets. I have regrets that I didn't walk down to his cottage and say, Daddy, teach me how to paint. Mm-hmm. I have regrets that I didn't realize the man that he was and never knew him, but he knew me. He said, John, there's a beautiful picture that John petting a cat as a young boy. And he said, I don't even remember Daddy painting that. He said, because I love that cat, but I wouldn't play with the cat openly because my brother Billy was older and they didn't play with cats, and he and his friends would have made fun of me. So I was very secretive about loving this cat. But Daddy saw that and captured that, and it's John's favorite painting of any, and we have it in the film and in the book. But it's that perception. He said, so Daddy saw me, but I never really saw Daddy. And Mama called, and he was at Ole Miss as a 18-year-old and said, your dad has died. And his first thought, John said, and I didn't have time in the film to go into great depth with this, but some of that is in the book. But he said, my first thought was, this changes nothing.
Yeah.
This changes nothing. He's not in my life. And he said, and I didn't realize it in fact changed everything. Our whole world, our whole trajectory of life for the whole family. And you mentioned Sissy, and Malcolm White was talking about, meeting Sissy, and, we were talking, so everybody that met her just thought, wow, she's just this incredible person. And everybody says, without Sissy, there would have been no Walter Anderson. Without the whole Anderson family, because what you said, they broke that lock off. And wow, he wasn't a bum. He has been working his tail off out there for years and years. Look at these logs, look at these paintings, stacks of paintings, not only just paintings, but wonderful things. And there are detractors, and you and I,
we had a guy on the Facebook page that he was just like, yeah, what worthless, but I was just like, well, and he was trying to say, well, I'm important. I get paid to write. Well, congratulations. But
but you see people like that, and I immediately like, okay, I'm not going to engage. Because if you're obtusively refusing, you're deliberately refusing to get it or acknowledge. Yeah. And yeah, not every one of the thousands and thousands of pieces of artwork. Look at how many stinkers do you and I do? I haven't done thousands, and I've had quite a few stinkers, but there are such jewels in his work, and those 10 paintings last night, and I'd never seen about 8 of them. And being able to look up close, and Robert and I, or there's a picture of me pointing to Robert, like, can you believe that? Look at this. And so that's what Anderson did to us. He pointed out things to us and like, hey, did you see this on this shell over here? And just beautiful things. But without the family breaking that lock and saying, wow, look at what Walter was doing,
Yeah.
Then starting sharing that with the world, because without that family putting the little stamp in the corner, without that family trying to organize, how do we do this, and getting the Memphis Brooks and Reading Sugg and getting it out there and sharing it with the world. So that's one of the things I was thanking Mary, maybe in the acknowledgments of the whole family. Walter is known as the South's greatest artist. Well, this is the South's greatest art family, because they've gotten him out there in so many ways. They continue to sell the block prints done now with screen printing and all, and Miss Carolyn does a wonderful job with those, and the Realization Shop in Ocean Springs. You need to check that out, everybody. But they continue that legacy of sharing his artwork, and at affordable prices, where, like, was important to Walter. He hated the widgets and things,
Oh, yeah.
but it was also something that he wanted people that love beauty to be able to have beauty, even if they couldn't afford a lot. So that it was all mixed up in there. But this family writing the books, Mary writing the books, and she did so many wonderful, shepherded so many wonderful projects. Without them,
not to interrupt, but Mary, just watching her in that documentary, I love her. She was just a ray. She was a big beaming ray of sunshine through the whole thing. You just want to do this, give her the big hug. Right.
Well, and Leaf with the dancing with the hands.
Oh my gosh, how talented! Yeah. Can you imagine her practicing while her dad's working on the painting
in the community center? Yeah.
It's just incredible. And there was one moment in there when Billy said, I think Dad was coming down the street and I crossed the street on the other side because I didn't want to be associated with him. That was a dagger in the heart. I mean, that was just so sad. But like you said, you understand where they were, because they just didn't understand. How can you? But you're right. They got that opportunity to understand, which prevented the trauma, which allowed them to move forward. And they're all so talented and creative in their own way. And that, like I said, the documentary is a love letter to the art. It's a love letter to the coast, but it's definitely a love letter to that family.
Well, thank you for that. And I'm glad that it is. And that comment of I would cross to the other side of the street. The sad thing is, and more dagger to the heart, is all four of the children made a comment like that in the interviews, because I interviewed each of them for about 2 or 3 hours. I mean, long interviews. Each one of them said the same kind of thing. And as a father, this perceptive eyes, of course he realized that, and of course that would hurt. And John said, and I know, some family members said, well, John is romanticizing Daddy and this kind of thing. And you know what? We all have our own perspectives, and it's okay. Mary told me in a note, a sweet note about the book. She said, you've got some contradictory things in here. And I'm like, Mary, the whole book is interviews with the family, and you guys are all contradictory sometimes, and that's okay. We all have our points of view. We're all telling our view. And I think standing back and being outside of the family, you can stand back and kind of see a whole picture. Mm-hmm. But John's view of his dad, he said, I truly believe, Anthony, that with Daddy on the island, he was able to love us maybe a little better from afar.
Yeah.
Than being embarrassed by him and being hurt. Because and it goes along with the crazy argument. If you make it home for your child's birthday, and so what if you give her a library book? He stole the book from the library, I guess, and gave it to Mary. Well, but he wrapped that, gave it to her. He was there. If you're just totally out of it and totally insane, you can't keep up with things like that. And I need to order more paint, and I need to getting those paintings safely back, even though water stain and stuff. I mean, sailing to Horn Island at night. And there are times when, one time sailing out there in December, a boat runs over him. And later that boat said, it was boys that had been drinking out on Ship Island, so they didn't have their lights on. And they said, we better go back and see. They go back, and he's in the water pushing the boat, swimming and freezing. They had to pry his hands off the boat like with a screwdriver, because he was so cold and shivering. And when they could finally understand what he's saying, he's livid that they messed up his boat, and his boat sank and all his supplies, and messed up his trip going out there. So it's not a thank you for saving me. He was so angry. Yeah. And what's interesting is that story, all right, we've done this film, we've done this book, and in the process, we have partnered with John. There is the bicycle logs of Walter Anderson.
Yeah.
So the story I just told you is coming from a book that's going to come out next year, which is called, the Horn Island logs of Walter Anderson. So a book coming out next year is the bicycle logs. So it's sort of like the islander comes ashore, and he was taking his bike across China. He's taking his bike across to Florida or Texas, and the tires are melting off the bike because the asphalt's so hot in August. So John and the family have collected all of the bicycle logs, and Robert and I are publishing that next year. And it's going to be another beautiful book with lots of new art that people haven't seen. So we're going to have a follow-up book coming from this. But that story I just told you, that's one of those things that I just read in editing this book. So there are a lot of, the more we learn about Anderson, and I love that you've gotten so much out of it. There's more to come. He keeps revealing stuff to us. It's really cool.
You bring up the Walden analogy too, and I think that obviously his artwork is brilliant. When one of my childhood idols, Chuck Jones, who's the great animator who did everything from Bugs Bunny to The Grinch to Ricky Tikki Tavi, is just one, frankly, in probably my favorite animator, said that Walter Anderson's line work was as good as it comes. So he, as an artist, he was brilliant. And I feel like I love his work after China. The China work that he did was really great. That said, his writing was really, really good also. And you said, people could say, well, he was totally crazy, but no, he was totally with it in the sense that his observational skills were totally on. The things that he saw, most of us just kind of walk through life sleepwalking anyway, but he was seeing some really incredible things. And I think it showed up not only in his artwork and in his writing.
Well, we had to suffer through John Maxwell reading it,
Oh, yeah, what a hack.
So hard. No,
by the way, you gave John one of your paintings that you did on Horn Island.
Yeah.
That was absolutely gorgeous. And what a treat for him to be able to get that.
Well, thank you. I wanted to give something special to him because John, he came and we recorded that at my kitchen table. He came and he had not read the quotes of Anderson. So he sat down and did cold reads on these things. And we only did 2 or 3 takes on these things. And he's reading and he just stops at one point. And he said, this guy is a poet. And then he just kept stopping and said, I'm just intrigued with this writing, because he had no idea. And his writings have been out there, but the Horn Island logs, there's so much of it that's kind of pedantic. It's, I got up, I ate breakfast, I did a watercolor, went to bed. Got up, saw a boat, waved, went to bed. This kind of stuff, or nursed a raccoon back to health, went to bed. It's really, really interesting stuff, but not what you would necessarily call poetry. And then you come across an entry where, wow. So he was just keeping these as a log, like we might keep something for taxes. I traveled this many miles today, but then he would be more reflective at times. And that's where these little quotes come from. And now I cannot read anything. I've been reading these new things and I'm hearing John Maxwell's voice reading this, because he was so perfect, because the words were so wonderful, but John Maxwell took it to another level. So we were so fortunate. Everyone on this project just made it better. Tony DeFada, another art.
Oh, I love Tony. Yeah.
Tony is wonderful. And I interviewed him, and don't take this wrong. I'm not saying, I didn't expect much from Tony. That's not it. I thought, well, I don't need much from Tony and the museum staff and Julian Rankin, who's another great, and Maddie and Meg. I'm like, I don't need much because I have so much from the family. But all of the things they started sharing, and some of the historical information and all that I needed to kind of tie it together without a narrator, but their observations, and Tony especially was the one that just blew me. I'm like, I could have used a lot more of him and Maddie and Julian, but having to pare it down to an hour. But everybody that we interviewed, there were no duds. There was not. It was always a matter. John Anderson said last night, he said, I watched Anthony and it was like taking a 10,000 piece puzzle, but you can only use 1,000 pieces of it, so you have these 10,000 pieces. So which 1,000 do you pick out to put together the one puzzle? And that's kind of what it was like, because it was an embarrassment of riches, as Anderson said.
Anthony, you should take some of those interviews and put them online. I mean, you should put them.
We are going to do that. Actually, in the event last night, I took 5 minutes that had not been seen. It was an event for JA donors and things. It was a wonderful event. And maybe that'll segue into, because we had JA students who were friends of my son. My son composed the music and got some of these JA
Which
students.
is amazing, by the way. I just blew me away. When I was listening to it, I said, this is really good. This is really professional. And then I saw the credit at the end. I went, you've got to be kidding.
And Ryan, I think, was 18 when he started the music on this. And the piano player, Carter Elliott, who was wonderful. He was 16 when he recorded with us, and Courtney Francois and on cello, and Fumi Hall on flute. But they were all Jackson Academy students. So last night's event was kind of a celebration of them, as well as the Anderson Project. And they signed books with us for the donors.
That's great.
It was wonderful. But we did a little behind the scenes video that I'm going to post online I might do that here in this next week here, as this is coming out, but we're going to post online, and it shows them in the recording session here behind my house in the studio, and watching these young people and my daughter talking about helping film. So it's a little 5-minute featurette, but, because I had one person say, kids didn't do that. And I'm like, well, I'll show you footage of it, and so it was, as a dad, is a wonderful thing. But as a filmmaker, Marshall, I think I've always wanted to be a filmmaker, and I wanted to have these great collaborations. I had no idea it would be with my children and my wife, but getting my son, be able to talk about the music, and then him say, Dad, what do you think about this? I'm like, oh, what instrument are you? He said, I was thinking of flute with that. And, he said, but not like the funky flute music in the old Islander film, and talking through that process and collaborate. And I'm thinking, I could do this the rest of my life and do films with, because the collaboration, first of all, he lives upstairs, so I can go upstairs and, but just being in sync and collaborating with my daughter, but also like with Robert and his astute observations. He's a great storyteller, good instincts. And I've always had to be a one-man band with low budget productions and all. And now being able to collaborate in a bigger scale, Marshall, it's been wonderful, and I can't wait going forward. I want to develop a network of Mississippi storytellers, and because we think about the writers, we think about how many great artists we have, and then now name all the filmmakers. I mean, we got Louis Dollarhide, who was, we've got some really great. Walt Grayson does a great job with the stories he tells, but we have a much smaller number of those kind of storytellers, and I think we've got so many stories to tell that I can't tell them all. Robert and you can't tell them all. But as going forward, I mean, there are writers, artists. There's so many things we want to tell. So I think this is just the start of something wonderful.
Yeah, but one of the reasons why I started this series and why I do the conversations on MPB and why I do the radio show is because, I mean, for 25 years, I've drawn the cartoons, and Mississippi's given me so much. Right. Family so much. For doing this stuff for me is just being able to repay back that debt, to be able to tell the stories. I mean, the world needs to know you, for instance, because you've just produced this amazing film, and you did great work. You do great work with Robert, on the series for MPB also. And you've done, I mean, like I said, you're very talented. I didn't even know you could play piano until I saw that video of you just beating the honky tonk piano. I was like, okay, if nothing else, he can survive in a bar.
I am like, and I grew up playing, and that was actually a gospel song I was playing. But I grew up, traveling with little gospel quartets. My mom was one of the best piano players I know, and we would play piano together in church. Me on the low end chording, because I can't follow the notes, but I can sit down and just chord, and she'd play up here at the upper ends. I love that and love playing with her. But anytime we travel with Robert, we're in Rome. We're filming on the first day of our Rome tour, and there's this grand piano. They're setting up for this big concert outside the Coliseum here in Rome. And Robert's like, hey, dude, play something. I'm like, Robert, I can't. No, come on, play something. Every time there's and McCarty Pottery, here, play something. But here we are in Rome, and I look at the guy who's setting up the piano. He kind of like shrugs, like, okay. So I sit down and do something right quick, and I'm just but we're in Cleveland, and they've got these neat painted pianos sitting around, and Robert said, hey, play something. I'm like, Robert. So I sit down and he records that. And now it's had like almost 4,000 views on his Instagram. And then the lady comes out the store and she posts one on her site and it's had about 3,000 views. I'm like, I never knew I was such a piano sensation.
There you go.
How crazy is that? But that's
it's the parable of the talent. You know that. You go out there and use your talent, and you get more talents, and you get to.
That's like, yeah, exactly. But it's like Mississippi.
Yeah.
That you've got all these. You're talking to a butcher. Oh, and he's the greatest storyteller I've ever met. You're talking to this person over here, and oh, you ought to hear him play guitar. We were talking with Chelsea Pierman outside of Chesley Pierman outside of McCarty Pottery, and his studio. Had a wonderful visit. I was not familiar with his art, and I'm loving his art. And he said, "Oh yeah, Kerry Hudson and I wrote a song on his newest album and all." And I'm like, oh, wow. You're a songwriter, you know, so every person you meet in Mississippi, we don't wear one hat, just like you wear multiple hats. We wear lots of hats because I'm like, I can sleep when I'm dead. I want to do a lot of things. I like publishing. I like painting. I like drawing. I like music, storytelling. So again, we can sleep when we're dead. So let's just stay busy.
We're going back to Walter Anderson, and I think you figured it out too, and I have too. That it used to be for me. There came a point where artwork became a job, and that was bad, you know. Because I remember my dad growing up. Dad loved to work on cars, and then he bought a car garage, and then suddenly our car stopped working because it became work, you know. And so. But with Walter Anderson, you know, I mean, it literally, people can talk about art therapy all day long, but for him, and when I saw the documentary the first time, I just picked up the phone and started texting Dunlap, you know, Bill Dunlap, about it, because I was like, Bill, you gotta tell me more here. This is incredible. And Bill said, I had heard that when Walter Anderson was at painting and was, you know, obviously he wasn't thinking about future selling it, you know, at auction, because he was doing it on typing paper, right? So he was right. Whatever materials he had at the moment, he was going to be cranking out art. But that was his therapy, and that was literally how he remained sane. And he truly loved the process. And I think that's why he created so much beautiful art, is because if he'd have been just thinking, well, I want to do 6 paintings that are going to sell and feed my family, I don't think he would have done as good art. I really don't.
Faulkner talks about people that writing of the glands and not of the heart. Yeah. And good writing comes from the heart, and Welty, you know, the serious daring starts within kind of thing. And I think Anderson was the artistic equivalent of that the idea and I think China, you mentioned, was where that happened. Wait a minute, it's not about the best materials. It's not even about the materials at all. It's about this experience. And I do think, yes, if he's putting 2,000 paintings, some are on the floor, some are in the fire, but 2,000 of them are in this chest in this locked away room, I do think he valued those for whatever reason, maybe more than the others in some way. And writing the 104th Psalm and being thankful, you know, I think there's a lot to that, a lot of dimensions there. But yes, they're on typing paper, they're getting wet, but I think even then he was so he cared so little about what society thought, what the world thought. I don't want to go to the art show that's going to make me rich and famous. I'm going to China because I want to see Tibetan art, you know, and experience that.
And he went to China right after World War II, when the communists were fighting the nationalists. I mean, it was like probably the least safe time you could have been wandering around China. You know, and he did get robbed at one point. It's amazing the guy didn't get killed when he was over there. But his watercolors during that time were unbelievable, just absolutely gorgeous.
And the funny thing is, Marshall, is that those were recreations of a sort. Yeah. Because when his passport was stolen and he was robbed by these military men out on the rice paddies one night as he slept, they took his passport, his money, his travel plans, all this stuff. I mean, but they took all his paintings and sketchbook. Everything was gone.
Oh, wow.
Everything he had with him was gone. So he had no money. So he had to turn around, walk back to Hong Kong or wherever he was, Shanghai. And as he was there waiting for money to come home and a new passport and all of this, that's when he said, I'm going to paint things again. And then those seafood markets with those exotic creatures that he started painting and all. But he had to start again. He recreated the logs, and those logs are in the book that's coming out next year. And it was fascinating to read, because he not only had his passport stolen, I think maybe 3 times he lost his passport on the trip. One time lost it out of his bus, and the next bus coming along found it and caught up with him and gave it. I mean, it was this crazy, you're like, you can't write these adventures. If you wrote this, if Marshall Ramsey said, I'm going to write a novel about this guy traveling across China, that people wouldn't believe it.
Right.
He lived this life and Robert was keen on the word extraordinary and wanting that in our title. So Walter Anderson, The Extraordinary Life and Art of the Islander. It was extraordinary. It was amazing. And we put life first because there've been a lot of books about his art. And that's another thing John clues in on, is that his life isn't separate from that. Right. Jared Partridge, another great artist in Ocean Springs, he said he was in New York and saw Anderson paintings in a gallery, and he started telling them these stories about Walter. Hey, I know him, of him, and the guy at the museum, the gallery said, we don't care about those stories. We just look at the art, which is ridiculous. Yeah. I mean, an ounce of pretension, so all that's ridiculous. But his life and story is an art. His life and story, connecting with that art, it all tells this story. And that's what's so wonderful about it. Even on a painting that may be one of the lesser, or a painting that, wow, this one was damaged in Katrina, as most of them were, it's still the story of that. And John's like, I'm not sure people would want this painting. And I'm like, John, the Katrina damage is part of that story. To me, that makes that more valuable. Yeah, it's a part of enduring. And Jill Connor Brown, another great one in the film, it's a story of resilience and coming back. And that's what his life was, over and over. And we are still talking about him today. And it's this triumphant idea of art enduring and this beauty surrounding us in life, with a life that had its troubles and had its difficulties. But somebody said, well, his daddy Walter never took care of his family. And I'm thinking, they all had to work and he never took care of his family. I'm like, for the last 60, 70 years, he's taken care of the whole family. I mean, so I think you have to step back, and in the looking at it over the course of time, I'm just honored and thrilled to be able to be part of telling this story, both in the book and the film. The film, if people are interested, you could go to the MPB website, or you can go to pbs.org, type in Walter Anderson, search that, and it will come up. So people all over the country, if you've seen the film and you like it and you're watching this, tell your friends in Vermont to go online, pbs.org, and watch the Walter Anderson film, because we want to get the word out, because this is an inspiring story, and not only an inspiring artists like you and me, but it's a pretty cool story.
Well, that's the thing, I remember when we moved here, and of course we started having kids, and we would go to the pediatrician's office, and they'd have the Walter Anderson block prints, and we've got one in our bathroom right now, and like I said, I always appreciated him as an artist technically and so forth. But like I said, the more I've learned about him, and then seeing the documentary, and then now getting to read the book, it just makes every brushstroke make much more sense. It makes every subject that he paints that much more sense. And like I said, just getting that story of the family, being able to have that redemption and being able to understand their father and having that gift, which a lot of families don't have, because they may have a dad or a mom or an uncle or somebody that's like Walter Anderson in that same scenario, and they never understand the demons that they were battling on a daily basis. Right. And now we completely understand, not only did he battle the demons, he won the war, and I mean, it just was an incredible life. And you and Robert did such a wonderful job telling that story. And I do hope that there are going to be future stories that y'all tell together, because you do seem to have gotten a very nice formula put together. Like you said, your team with your family, And I joked about John Maxwell being a hack before. John Maxwell's the most talented person I've probably ever met in my life. So
And such a wonderful guy.
just a nice human being too. And that is something too I've discovered about Mississippi. And you and I have both been able to meet a lot of really cool people just in day to day for what we do. The thing that makes Mississippi different is that the talented people here generally love each other. I mean, they like each other. They're willing to help each other. They're kind. The egos are for the most part in check. It's just such a unique artistic community that we have here.
And that's one of the things that is the most rewarding thing, because again, getting to talk to you, getting to talk to Malcolm White, getting to talk to folks with this process, and that's what Robert and I, like you said, we want to tell more stories. So all of the people listening who like the stories and like the things and want to underwrite future projects, you can get in touch with Marshall and me, and we'll take care of those things. But there are so many positive things. And I used to, when I taught years ago, I used to write to my students. I write a note to each student when they left my class, and a lot of the times I would write, I want you to be a positive part of a negative world. And today there is so much negativity and backbiting, and I've got friends on both sides, every side of every little thing. And I don't post political. And that's part of your job, but there's so much good that brings us together. And whether that be religion, whether that be something inspirational, stories like this that are spiritual, certainly, even if it's not overtly religious, but all of these things, our faith, our roots, our camaraderie, something combines us with these Mississippi stories. Something joins us together, and we can be economically on the low end of a lot of things across the country, but we are rich. We are rich.
You talked about the political cartoons, and I've done that for a long time, and it's a much different environment to do those now than it was even 10 years ago. And part of it's social media, because everybody has a platform now and they can get in touch with you, and so you can, and I've gotten threats over the years and everything else, but now people in the last few years, they're afraid. And when you're afraid, you're angry. And I think what you're saying is spot on, that we can use our blank canvas every day. And I obviously do more than the political cartoons, but we can use our art to inspire. And like I said, I think you did that with this documentary so well, because not only did I think you get a chance to learn something about an artist that maybe people only knew on a superficial level, but they also understand that their art can be their own salvation too, that it truly is a God thing to be able to create that kind of art.
Well, and I know we're wrapping up here, but let me just say this, and I love Dave Barry, but I think you're the good cousin. So that's all I'm saying.
Oh, I wish Dave Barry were my cousin.
No, Ramsey. Oh, I'm sorry.
No.
Who was your cousin?
Dave Ramsey.
Dave Ramsey. Oh, the money guy.
Yeah.
Well, you're still the good. I misunderstood. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. He got the money. I got the hair. That's how it worked out in the family. It worked out great.
I think you got the good end of the deal.
Yeah, no, it's still attached. So, for the most part. Look, I hope that we can do this again. Like I said, I didn't even scratch on you personally, because like I said, you've had a fascinating career. And to me, it blows my mind that you went to the math and science high school, and here you are, this creative, which you think that's okay, that's right, that's left brain and you're right brain. But anyway, you had influences there too. I know Mr. Carter and Ms. Richardson both were big influences.
Absolutely, they were. Thank you for mentioning them. And
I just want to throw that out, because you're a teacher now and you're doing that influence, and it's just great to see you paying that forward also.
I'm so glad you did that. And I was the one at the school that if they had a visitor say, hey, my son really doesn't like math or science, they would call me over and say, Anthony, talk to these people, because I hated math and science, but the humanities, creative writing, creative media, Mississippi writers, those are the things. And they poured into me encouragement. And that's why this story is here. And the first time I saw the Islander film was at the math and science school. So that was cool.
Yeah. throw out your website real quick, because I know you've got a lot more book signings till Christmas.
We do, and I know that Facebook's the best place to see where Robert St. John and what I'm doing. But Thaxton Studios and RobertSt.John.com, and people can buy books. But support your independent bookstores. And we're going to be in Columbus signing books. We're going to be in on the coast. We got a lot of things coming up. So check us out. But Facebook, we keep plowing along on that, and also you get to see piano playing sometimes. So that's
incredible piano playing. Next time you do it, I'll bring my harmonica, and then we'll just have a
good
concert on that. Anthony, thank you for taking the time, and it's been a blessing. I hope you and your family have a wonderful Christmas.
Thank you, Marshall. You too.
Okay, take care. Thanks, and travel safe. Thank you for watching this episode of Mississippi Stories. Make sure to subscribe to the Mississippi Today YouTube channel and click the bell to be notified every time a new video uploads.